Dave, tell us about the Miami Heat this year. They had a big season last year. They were an NBA Finals team. They won
Mhm.
2 games in the finals. They shocked the world in a lot of ways,
Mhm.
even making it there. So coming off of that, what are you looking for out of your favorite team?
Um, this year, um, what I'm looking for out of the Heat is, for one, to talk about their offseason stuff. Our biggest weakness last year in the playoffs, especially, I think, was our guard defense. We had horrible guard defenders: Dragic, Hero, Robinson, Nunn. None of those guys can guard anyone, really. Dragic is formidable. He can be average.
Right.
Hero and
Yeah.
Robinson get picked up all the time. Um, we had an Avery Bradley, who's a great solution to that problem, and just a
Yeah.
great role player. Um, Very happy about that. And we had Mo Harkless, who is like, I'm really not even sure how much he's going to end up playing. I think he'll play a decent amount, but I could also see him just ending up the 10th man who doesn't play that much because his shot has been super inconsistent throughout his career. And I just feel like, I don't know if that continues, then I don't know. He's like a pretty good defender, but he's not elite enough to like ignore his bad shot.
He's a good
We
defender he was still the weakness on a playoff team in Portland
Yeah,
when he was like they lost to the Warriors and it was immediately we need to replace Mo Harkless.
yeah. Um, so from there, um, I mean, this team, they want to run it back. That's what Riley said. That's what Spoelstra said. And you see that in their moves. They re-signed Dragic,
Yeah.
and even more surprisingly, they re-signed Myers Leonard to a pretty nice deal. 2 years, 19
Yeah.
million, same contract Ibaka got, um, which really feels like a
He's not Serge.
no, he's not Serge Ibaka. It really feels like a thanks for being on the team this year kind of
Yeah.
contract. But losing someone like Crowder, I think hurts us a little bit. Um, Iggy is a year older, and Iggy really didn't
Yeah.
start to play with much interest at all until the bubble. Um,
Yeah.
so
Which
I,
honestly, I feel like that's fine though. Like I don't know.
mhm,
I'm obviously not a Heat fan, and I'm assuming if that's the team you root for night in night out, you would want more out of him in these regular season games. But like at the same time, he's what 37 at this point. Like knowing that he'll show up when it matters, while not the best thing from like a team perspective, especially just after we talked about the Clippers and all the sort of preferential treatment stuff they've had to deal with. But I think you can kind of accept that loss of
mhm,
Iggy in regular season games, knowing
yeah,
he'll be fresh when he's needed.
yeah, yeah. No, that's fair. And then so thinking lineup wise, um, they really have a lot of options, and I don't think it's an too many options type of thing. I think they kind of fulfill
Yeah.
different needs. I think the definites in the starting lineup are Butler, Robinson, and Bam. I
Okay.
think those three are definitely in there, and then you can kind of fill those other two spots with take your pick of Tyler Hero, Dragic, maybe if none looks good in the preseason or something.
Yeah.
Um,
I feel like you
Brad,
can get a start. You can get a start out of none in the regular season,
definitely.
even if he's not playing playoff minutes.
And then maybe you start Harkless at the other spot, or I mean, this is probably or Kelly. You still have a Olynyk. He probably gets a lot of starts.
Go
And
man.
then this is definitely the Homer in me coming out, but like very excited about Precious Achua. I think will be very good, and I think he will be playing important minutes for us. That's my another one of my bets today. I do think Precious is going to close games for us at some point this year. Um,
So do you think he's going to be like kind of an OG Anunoby type, like gets into the building, sees what the I'd hate to say culture when we're talking about the Heat, but like sees what the culture is, sees what's expected, and takes to it like a fish to water.
Definitely. I mean, this is again a lot of intangible stuff, but like he's already been like working out with Tyler Hero a lot. They are
Yeah.
like becoming fast friends, and I just think he
That.
seems like a guy who He's like the perfect Heat pick.
Yeah, yeah.
Not a fantastic offensive player, but looks like a great defender, can switch on defense, and insanely
Which is
athletic.
important.
Yeah.
Yeah, like you can work with that out of a rookie.
And I'll say the biggest X factor for this year for the Heat is the Bam improvement. Um,
Right.
does he look like Eastern Conference Finals Bam? Because if he does, that is a huge jump.
Like if
He
that's
was
just Bam's new normal now.
Yeah, because in the Eastern Conference Finals, I want to say he was averaging like 22, 10, and 5, something like that, on great
He had great touch
efficiency,
around the
great touch, and elite defense, always guarding, always going out to the perimeter to guard Tatum.
Yeah,
Um, if he's that, I mean, I think he takes that leap into like that next level of player, like that maybe that top 15 level of player. Um,
yeah.
and if that happens, that'll be huge for us. But ultimately, I would say regular season success um, is going to be a little bit better than last year, but I have a tough time putting us up at the very top. Definitely not better than the Bucks. Um, and I'd say we end up in that 2 to 4 spot, but just to be a little bit more conservative with it, I think we end up like I'm gonna say like 3, 4th seed is where we'll end up.
That feels like a good estimate. I kind of think the Heat might wind up in. And I think I said this in our first episode, but they might wind up in like the kind of spot that Denver was in a couple of years
Hmm.
ago, where it was like, okay, yeah, the Rockets and the Warriors are probably the two best teams in this conference, but Denver's trying night in night out in a way that the Rockets just aren't. And so, congratulations, you get a home conference semifinals series, like a home field advantage,
Yeah,
home court advantage conference semis series, which is not a bad spot to be in.
no, it's a good spot, and I know um, again another intangible thing, but these stories are coming out the last couple of weeks of like oh, people around the NBA feel like this was a fluke or something, which really felt
Yep.
like a. I wouldn't be surprised if like someone on the Heat purposely leaked
Yeah.
that as motivation
That
or something.
some Godfather stuff.
Yeah, just anything to add like another chip on Jimmy Butler's shoulder.
Yeah. That's the funniest part of this is that like you could not find a group of players that are going to take that more seriously than this Heat team.
Yeah. Um, so I think they're going to have the motivation, and they still have. I mean, good chemistry is a like factor that we don't talk about enough, and
No, absolutely.
this Heat team has
Like
great chemistry.
You saw the end of a lot of Clippers games last year. A team that had what has come out to be like next to zero chemistry, and
Yeah,
that's how you get Marcus Morris shot putting the ball out of bounds to nobody at the end of a game. That's how you get a team just looking like nobody wants to shoot, and the Heat don't have that problem,
yeah,
and it's important.
yeah,
I feel like at some point you want to just eliminate as many risk factors as you can, and the risk of everyone hating each other does not seem to be a problem here.
yeah.
So moving on, let's talk about another team that I think like it's has a spot in the Eastern Conference that's kind of uncertain right now. That would be the Indiana
Hmm.
Pacers. I think the big picture with the Pacers is everyone around them seems to either already be better, like seems to have been better than them last year or gotten better than them this offseason. And
Yeah,
they seem to kind of tread water this year. I just don't know how they wind up any higher than like 6 or 7 in the East this year. I think I have them picked 7th in the East just because we're doing another year of Domas and Miles Turner. Victor Oladipo did not look like the same player when he came back from his injury last season, and obviously injuries. Like I think he had a torn quad, which I think is one of those like, yeah, you're back in 12 months, but you're not 100% until like 18.
hmm
So hopefully he is 100% of the Victor Oladipo we saw before that. Um, but like right as it stands right now with what we saw at the end of last season, I think they're going to be down this year.
yeah, yeah. I completely agree. It's they're just going to be down because they didn't get better really, and teams around them
Yeah.
did. They have the new coach. I'm forgetting his name. He was the assistant with the Raptors. He was like Nurse's top assistant, and I know he's like pretty well respected around the league. So I think that's a a factor that we can't really judge yet because we haven't seen them. Um, but yeah, I mean, I guess yeah, I don't know how you improve this team. Are you looking to trade Oladipo now, or are you trying to finally break up this Turner Sabonis logjam?
I think the Turner Sabonis trade is the most obvious one, probably because it is just the best one from a basketball perspective. Like, I think regardless of who you decide to move, moving one of those two big men gives you a clearer path to some sort of identity. And I know we say identity a lot, but like just knowing what you're good at and what you should be trying to do late in important games is
Yeah,
really important. And I think right now they just have like, I don't know, there's uncertainty there.
yeah,
I would probably, I think the floor for this team is they're like a 9 seed or a 10 seed at the deadline, and they decide, all right, yeah, let's try and flip Turner or Sabonis to somebody that needs them. But like in their minds, if everything goes right, both of those guys are on the team at the end of the season.
yeah, definitely.
I don't think they want to trade either of them right now actively.
It feels like they like this. They like the too big thing. Like I don't
Yeah,
think
yeah.
they see it as much of a logjam as like the general public does.
No, absolutely not. And like I don't like it's not the worst fit of two big men you could have. It's not great, but Turner gives you like enough athletically, enough rim protection, and a little bit of shooting that it's like not hard. But at the same time, like it still feels like both of these guys could be working better in the offense that they run.
Yeah.
What would you say is the crunch time lineup like Brogdon, Oladipo, Warren, and the two bigs?
Yeah. I think that's what they used in the playoffs too, right? I mean, they didn't have Brogdon,
Yeah, that was
um,
what they ran with,
but
like with some brief breaks for Jakar Sampson.
yeah, and the holidays. I think they had both of them out there at once at certain
Yeah, of
times.
course.
Um, yeah, I mean, look, this is still it's a good lineup.
Yeah,
Like, there's a nice
and I think
mix here. You got good defenders.
yeah,
You got a great pick and roll guy in Brogdon. You got Warren, who has become this like microwave shooter. Like,
yeah, out of
um,
nowhere when the league restarted last year.
yeah. And then, I mean, the 4 or 5 guys as we were just talking about. I mean, it's one of the better starting lineups in the league.
Yeah, and I think they are kind of in that we're going to try every night spot.
Yeah,
Like it's not like they're sitting there with superstars that are saying, "Okay, I just want to make sure I'm fresh for the playoffs." Like the best players on this team are probably going out every night and playing full games. There's not going to be a lot of load management on this team, which like I think we saw it a few years in a row with the Spurs. Like that kind of adds up at the end of the season, and it's
yeah,
like, oh yeah, you know what? Like Pacers are already at 41 wins. Wow, like they're a 6 seed if this ends today. Like
yeah,
I wouldn't be shocked if they wound up better than if they wound up ahead of a team that right now we are saying is head and shoulders above them.
yeah.
Just because I do think they're going to be trying every night.
Same.
So that I mean that's kind of all I had on the Pacers.
Yeah, not much. I can't really think right now if they had any big additions. Did they?
I couldn't really think of any. Like it seems like they really just decided we want to run it back with like a full year of healthy Vic, which I don't hate, but I think it's a bad year to just be saying we're going to run it back. Speaking of teams that want to run it back, though, the Boston Celtics.
Mm,
I said everyone around the Pacers either was better than them already or got better. Originally, I was thinking everyone around them got better, and then I remembered that Boston, I think, kind of took a step down this
mm,
year.
definitely.
Um,
Yeah, we
what
went
do
into
you
them.
what do you see from Boston?
Yeah, we went into them pretty in a lot of depth in our last episode, but I mean, a big like new X factor there is that Kemba is going to be out for a few weeks, and some
Yeah,
people say like mid-January. So if that's like 3-4 weeks of you got to start Jeff Teague, um, that is hurting you a lot.
It's not great. That
And
probably has like Carson Edwards minutes consistently on the back end too.
yeah, I mean, we're gonna get a close-up glance right away at like the Boston depth issue. I
Yeah,
will say though, um, this trade exception they got from the Hornets on Hayward, which
yeah.
is like $27 million. It's the biggest in NBA history.
Jesus.
They all they have to do to get a max player is ship out $9 million, and then they can afford a max player. There's a lot of options on the team for them to do that. Um, so I think I mean, they got to use that. Like
Oh
this
yeah,
is their
that's not
option.
something. To get.
Yeah, this is their opportunity to improve. Um, so whether that becomes like maybe it's not a max, maybe you do get Miles Turner. Maybe I don't know. You probably can't get yourself in the Harden conversation.
I mean, Tristan Thompson is 9 million right off the bat, which I
Hmm.
don't think they can trade him just yet. But whenever that like new player exception ends, you can trade him right
Yeah.
whenever that's up. There's
Um,
also, you can get creative with like Langford, Grant Williams, and I don't know, Tice. Like that gets you to 10-ish million.
okay.
So
Yeah.
like, they have options for how to get to that 10 million spot.
Yeah.
Um,
So I think this team, as much as we have kind of said they've not improved, there is a big possibility of them making this type of
they could.
move. Um, but that early couple weeks where Kemba's out, I do think is going to hurt them a bit. And,
Yeah.
if you start the season, and it's a shorter season, only 72 games, and if you start the season, what, 6-8 or something? Not that they will. I think they'll be a little bit better. But there is a world where they start at 6-8 because they don't have enough offensive production.
Yeah.
And that can really hurt you at the end of the season. That can mean you drop from a 5 to a 7.
And they were already a team that didn't have a lot of production off the bench. Like it was last year, it was very, we have our top seven and we just need one more guy to produce and we don't have it. So I think losing someone out of that now top six, like, is going to hurt this team more than it might some others.
Yeah.
Um, at the same time, though, like they still have a really good core.
Yeah.
Like every night, they're going to be able to roll out Tatum, Brown, Smart. Tice is still good at what he does. Like Tristan Thompson, I think had some beef up front for them that they haven't had at any point. Also, just takes like a guy who gives them hell whenever they play him and puts him on their roster. So like there's still a lot to be excited about with the Celtics. Like before the league shut down last year, Jason Tatum looked like a guy that might be taking that leap into superstardom. I still think Jaylen Brown has like a couple of leaps he could take.
Mm.
Like that's not a knock. I just think he's really good
Yeah.
and could be really, really good. So I think there's still a lot to be excited about with the Celtics. There are just questions that they haven't had previously.
Yeah. Um,
Um,
so yeah, I mean,
what do you think what do you think the ceiling floor is on them?
ceiling is. I mean, I think I'd
It's
have
tough
to
to gauge.
say like a 3 or 4 seed as they're currently constructed. Um, this doesn't feel like a team of like. I don't see the situation where they're like the Celtics of a couple years ago or the Bucks of last year, where they're just like one of these teams that just wipes the floor all regular season and is
Yeah.
like able to win every night because they have more talent. Like I don't think they're that team anymore. Um,
No.
so yeah, I mean, and then I mean maybe we're being too cynical about them, but I'd say the floor is like all these things we've talked about happen, and they don't get someone good out of that trade exception, and then they're like a 6 seed.
Yeah.
And then people are saying the next offseason, like, ooh, do we have to trade Jaylen Brown to upgrade?
I think they're probably going to wind up like 5 or 6,
Hmm.
just because I think like them and Toronto are both going to be down ish. I just think Toronto being healthier and also like still having a surprising amount of that core in the building is going to like cushion the fall a bit in a way that I don't think Boston has. Like I think Boston, Kemba being hurt is going to hurt them. Losing Hayward kind of lessens what they can do offensively. And I think of that like top six in the East, they're probably the team that's taken the biggest step back. So I
Definitely.
think it's going to be like them six, Indiana seven, but I think that might even be close.
Yeah.
And again, I like a lot of the players the Celtics have, and I want them to be playing well. I want them to be playing at a high level. I just don't see, again, who they jump to get to that level. Like, who's sliding back? Is it Miami? Is it Brooklyn? Philly, who we're going to talk about later in this episode? Like, someone has to fall below them for them to overperform that.
Yeah.
And I don't think anyone will. And we're back. In all honesty, yesterday I had to go to work, so we had to cut the recording short. With 3 teams to go, they're 3 very good teams. I think both of us are excited to unpack what their off seasons have looked like and what their seasons might look like. And we'll start, since we're talking off seasons, a little bit with the team that kind of had the biggest free agent move of the offseason, and that was the Toronto Raptors. They brought back Fred VanVleet, 4 years, $85 million. It's the Malcolm Brogdon deal. Dave, where do you think the Raptors are at this year? Obviously, Gasol and Ibaka are gone. What's your general impression?
I think this starting lineup that they have of Lowry, Fred, OG, Siakam, Baines now, picked up Aaron Baines, is still a really great starting lineup. And if Siakam returns to his pre-bubble form, all-star starter Pascal Siakam, I think they'll be really good. Definitely a playoff team, easily in that upper mid tier. But I think it'd be lying if I say that it looks like they've lost a little bit of a step. And there's a lot of ways this goes poorly.
I think you have a good point as far as losing a step. I think the depth that having both Ibaka and Gasol provides is something I don't think we really talked about enough with this team, but it's going to hurt at first, especially when you look at who the bigs that might be getting those minutes are now. It's not exactly a cast of all-stars. It's not exactly a League of Legends. And I think the depth is really just across the board kind of a thing they're going to have to contend with here. I mean, for as good as the Lowry and VanVleet backcourt is, you can get some 2-guard minutes out of Norm Powell, and then your 4th guard is who?
I think it's Terrence Davis, who is like an all right.
Okay.
He's all right, but like it's like the Raptors of the last couple of years were a big selling point of them has been their depth are gone.
Yeah.
And they're gonna have to rely a lot on some of these young guys.
Yeah. Like OG is gonna have to play a lot of big minutes this year.
Yeah. And then like Bembry and Matt Thomas, Terrence Davis, probably some Chris Boucher, G League MVP.
G League MVP, Chris Boucher.
Yeah. Those guys are probably going to have to play a lot of minutes because, I mean, just like looking at their depth chart, those are the next guys up.
Yeah, like that's just kind of where it is. I think in big games, you're probably just going to see like one of Lowry and VanVleet needs to be on the floor at all times because the ship kind of sinks if they don't have one of them out there. And like if there is a point where both of them go off, I think that's kind of like that's going to be this team's version of like the Embiid is off. What's the plus minus in those minutes? Where it's like, yeah, these are the things everyone watches and sees. Like if it's going to fall apart, it'll be here.
Yeah.
But again, I'm with you on the fact that they're going to be really good. Like they have 5 guys who can absolutely go.
Baines is a great substitute for Ibaka and Gasol.
Oh yeah,
he had a great year last year, and
he really came out of his shell a little bit.
Can shoot a little bit, like can open.
He's a good replacement.
He can both open up space down low for Pascal, because he can be out on the perimeter, and he can be down low to give Pascal more space to shoot. like more
Yeah.
mid-range, like really good fit, I think. But yeah, I really do think the biggest elephant in the room for them is kind of just Pascal.
Yeah.
I feel like few players had as much of a drop off in reputation over a 6 month period as Pascal, going from all-star starter to everyone saying he looked awful in the bubble.
To be fair, that Boston series was not good for him.
Yeah,
And it was kind of funny because, like, on either side, it was Brad Stevens being like, well, I'm going to take Pascal out of this. And then on the other side, it was Nick Nurse being like, well, I'm throwing box and ones at Kemba. So, like, we can do this all day. But I do think it looked like he had kind of gotten, like, I don't want to say figured out, but it did look like whatever Boston was doing, they had figured out what he was going to try and
yeah.
do and they counter it. Um,
A lot of it comes down to just like the moves he has.
yeah.
His offensive repertoire isn't as it's great for a second option
Oh, yeah.
or a third option, but when you
Great
become
open court offense, too.
yeah,
Like,
but when you become that first option on a team now that Kawhi's gone, it you gotta develop a few more moves. Like,
yeah.
and I think we just saw the limitations of that in the playoff game.
Especially, yeah. I mean, when in a playoff game where things kind of slow down a bit, too. Like, where we're playing a lot more half court, a lot more, we're getting longer into the shot clock. And that lack of versatility kind of showed. So, I mean, I think that's probably the biggest question facing them this year. Um, but to ask a different question, what do you think the floor and the ceiling is for this Toronto team? Where do you think they could go if everything breaks right?
If everything breaks right, I think they're back in the Eastern Conference Finals.
Mhm.
After not making it last year, I think they can do it. I think this is a team that maybe will make a trade, um, or if not a trade, they're going to be in the market for all those guys who get waived and bought out in right before the trade deadline,
Mhm.
and they'll pick up some random couple veterans, especially if they're playing well. If they maintain like a top three seed in the East with this team that they have right now, um, they'll probably be able to grab some of those guys. And I think we always forget that just halfway through the season, like six veterans become available every year.
Yeah, like good players.
Yeah. So I think they can grab a couple of those, and yeah, yeah, I think Eastern Conference Finals is the ceiling. I have a tough time thinking they can beat the Bucks or the Nets or the Heat
Yeah,
really in a series, or the Celtics to make it to the finals.
yeah. I think I'm kind of with you on their ceiling. Like, I think they're I don't think they're a definite first round win, but I think if they lose in the first round of the playoffs, something will have gone wrong.
Hmm.
Like, if if the Raptors get bounced in the first round, it would have to be by like an Indiana or a Boston, just looking at like where I think the conference is going to shake out to. And I think if that happens, we're talking about them like, well, what happened to the Raptors? How did they fall apart so quickly?
Yeah,
Um, and I think we've talked about it. Like, it would probably be they don't have the guard depth. Siakam's offensive game is still surprisingly limited. The lack of size up front comes back to bite them. Um,
maybe a
but I
step
do think
step back from Lowry.
realistically, yeah, because Lowry's what 34 now.
Yeah,
So yeah, he's not a spring chicken, although still a very good basketball player. All star last year, I believe. Um, but yeah, I think the ceiling for this team is second round team that's kind of scary and depending on matchup could
hmm,
make it to an Eastern Conference Finals.
yeah, I agree.
And moving on, the next team we wanted to talk about was the Philadelphia 76ers, a team that has stopped worrying and learned to love Daryl Morey. Dave, where are the Sixers at right now?
They have had a complete shakeup this offseason. We brought not we they brought Doc in, they brought Daryl Morey in, um, they brought shooters in. Most
Mm-hmm.
importantly, I think um, they brought Seth Curry, um,
Alec Burks.
Alec Burks. Um, I'm definitely missing some guys here, but we're
Got rid of Al Horford.
got rid of Al Horford somehow. Oh, Danny Green, they brought in. They're in a situation now where they have actually. It seems like Morey is fully bought in on Simmons and Embiid and is going to try to make
Mhm.
it work as best as possible.
Do you think they did enough? Like, do you think the shooting they've added, enough is a weird word to use about it, but like, do you think they've added enough shooting to the point where we won't be sitting there saying this team doesn't work
Uh,
when it's like their best lineup on the floor?
I think we'll probably still have a couple times like that.
Yeah.
Just because I think this team has always been awkward the past couple years, I don't
Hmm.
think they're going to shed that immediately. We'll see,
Yeah.
like, you know, we'll see like some early season game against a good team where they don't look great. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
but I think it'll just take some time to develop whatever this new system is going to be. Um, so that's why I think their ceiling is probably going to be one of those teams that might be even better in the playoffs than in the regular season. Just because
I
of
kind of agree with that.
yeah, just because of like you gotta take time, but also I think they have the depth of a good playoff team that
Yeah. That's good.
is always like a little bit less important in the regular season.
Yeah. I think their ceiling's a little bit lower defensively this year.
Mm,
Just, I mean, you're replacing Josh Richardson minutes with Seth Curry. Like, that's always going to bring you down a bit. Um, but I still think they're really good. And I think bringing Dwight Howard in could blow up in their face, but also could be exactly what this team needs because we've seen in the past couple of years how bad they look when Embiid goes to the bench. I think 2 years ago in the playoffs, they were like minus 100 or more. Like it was something absurd when Howard was off or when Embiid was off the court. So I think that's a good acquisition. Offensively, I think it's going to be a lot easier to watch this team this year because like there were closing possessions last year where it just looked like very clunky, very awkward. No one had a shot they liked, and then it wound up being Josh Richardson hoisting a 25 footer as the clock went to zero. Um,
or Tobias Harris, long
yeah,
two.
Tobias is an interesting one to look at on this team because like he's getting paid a lot, and ideally he's kind of off ball most of the time.
Yeah, he's getting paid Anthony Davis money.
Oh God.
They have the same contract.
Oh, I don't like that you put it in those terms.
um, but yeah,
Um,
no, I think Tobias. I don't mean to crap on him. Like he's just a victim of this like weird contract system that exists
yes,
right now where like second tier and third tier players have to sort of get the max because
yeah, because
or else they're
someone
going to
will.
lose them.
Yeah, it's like teams need to preserve. We talked about this, I think, yesterday with Atlanta. Like teams need to preserve their assets, and like whether that's cap space, which Atlanta used to sign Bogdan and Gallo, or it's just having a good player on your team that
Mhm.
you don't want to lose for nothing. You have to throw a max at Tobias Harris, and that's just kind of the way the NBA works at this point.
Yeah.
Um, I think once this team gets into the playoffs, though, they could be scary for a lot of teams just because, like, on a possession by possession basis, not many teams have someone who can dependably guard Embiid without fouling or just giving up points.
Hmm.
And not many teams have someone who can stop the Embiid and Simmons pick and roll. Like they ultimately have kind of a trump card there.
Yeah. And
And like I'm willing to bet on that, I guess would be what I would say.
yeah, and Simmons's growth as a defender last year was really important for them as
Yeah.
well. Like it's pretty much like an all NBA level defender.
Yeah.
And when you're that size, can go back and forth, switch on pick and rolls and everything. Um, it's just it's super valuable.
Oh yeah. No, he
They,
was incredible to watch.
you're right though. They probably do need that. I mean, we can kind of keep saying this about any contending team, but they probably
Yeah.
do need that 3 and D type guy
Mhm.
that they don't really have right now. I mean, they have Danny Green, but his three is kind of lost.
Yeah, there were stretches last year where he was just a D guy for the
Yeah.
Lakers.
And even at that, he's lost a step.
Yeah.
So they could probably again pick someone up halfway through the season.
Nice little
Um,
waiver deal.
but yeah, I still think this is going to be. I feel confident because of some of these signings that this is going to be the best Sixers team we've seen in a couple years.
I would agree with that. And speaking of the best teams we've seen in a couple years, let's move on to the Milwaukee Bucks. They gave up a lot of draft picks to get Drew Holiday. That was the biggest move they wound up making this offseason. There was a time when we thought they were trading for Bogdan
Hmm.
Bogdanovic. They didn't. Um, Dave, what as the dust has settled on this weird Bucks offseason, where do you think it's left them?
I mean, any hesitation I have with them doesn't negate the fact that I still think they're the best team uh, in the East, and probably are going to have the best record in the NBA again, just because of the fact of like you know the Lakers, LeBron and AD are, especially LeBron, is going to take the regular season a little slow.
Big game off here and there.
Yeah. So I think they definitely get the best record in the NBA this year again. And
Yeah.
it's probably the best starting lineup. I mean, Drew Holiday, Chris Middleton, Giannis, and Brook Lopez is a. I mean, that's four
It's a very
players.
good
Who's the
four.
who's the fifth player?
I think that's a very good question, and it kind of segues into our next segment on this, which is just who is that fifth guy? Like, is it Dante? Is it Pat Connaughton?
Mm,
They lost Wes Matthews, who I think got a lot of those minutes last year.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah. I started reading that. Didn't even realize that there
Hartenstein.
was a key player missing. Um, yeah, I don't know. That is definitely the issue. That's the issue they've had for a while, I think.
Right.
Um, but adding Drew definitely helps that a lot. I think adding Drew means that that fifth player can be doesn't have to be the same guy every night.
Yeah.
And I think they'll slot in different guys to see who works. I like Dante there. I think um, sliding Middleton to the three and having Dante at the two. I just kind of like his energy.
Yeah. There is an interesting, like, if they do go DJ, though, then you have a couple guys who can run pick and rolls with
That's
Giannis
true.
or Brook
Yeah.
that kind of didn't have as much of last year with Eric Bledsoe being playoff Eric Bledsoe.
Hmm.
Um, so I think that's something to watch. Just that it feels like they've added a couple more moves to make offensively, where last year they kind of could stagnate at times.
That's
Um,
true. Um, and I think you bring up an interesting point with, I think, in regards to Drew,
mhm.
that Drew isn't a world beater at pick and rolls and um, like playmaking.
No,
And when you look back at their problems in the playoffs last year, that is one of their biggest holes, especially in that Miami series. They really couldn't figure out a reliable way to score outside of Giannis' fast break.
yeah, yeah.
Um, and I think that's, if we're thinking like what the floor for this team is, I think they meet that floor and are a disappointment if, those that playmaking is again a problem.
Oh, yeah. And I mean, the funny thing is, I feel like Miami isn't even the only team that could give them that problem. Like,
Hmm.
obviously, Miami created problems for them because they had one of, like, I don't know, three people in the world that could one-on-one defend Giannis in the
Hmm.
half court with Bam Adebayo. But like, you run into a Toronto, you run into Philly. Like, those teams have the size and I mean, more Toronto than Philly, the coaching capability to really scheme you into some trouble.
Yeah.
So I mean, I think there's definite concerns on this team that still kind of exist, but I also think adding Drew makes a lot of that matter less.
Yeah.
Um,
Definitely. He's definitely a huge upgrade over, the collective Hill Bledsoe minutes. Um,
yes,
but I think after that, and we've kind of talked about this a couple times before already, but I don't really like their other moves they made.
yeah,
Um, I don't really understand bringing in a guy like Portis. Um, I don't understand getting like Bryn Forbes when I feel like there were other guards available. They ended up, getting DJ as well, which was a good. Um,
Torrey Craig might sneaky play a lot of minutes for this
yeah,
team.
that was
Like,
yeah,
just seventh guy, gonna be in your bench rotation every night, and I kind of like that move. But
that
other than
was
that,
probably the best one besides
there's some
Drew.
questions.
Um, but yeah, I can envision a scenario in which both Portis, DJ, and Bryn Forbes, or all three of them, aren't playing in a playoff game.
Yeah, yeah,
So if you're a
yeah. I could
contender,
definitely do that.
if you're, I think it's fair to judge these contending teams based on like who did you add for the playoffs,
Hmm.
and if all three of those guys aren't playing, and it is just Torrey Craig, which does seem very likely because of his skill set, um, then I think you'd have to rate this offseason as like kind of a negative.
A wash at least,
Yeah,
a wash at best.
yeah.
Um, so actually, as we start writing this off season off and look to the season, what do you think the floor and the ceiling is? Like, if the Bucks have a season they view as a success, where are they?
Um, I mean, gotta be a finals team and a title winner, I think. I mean, there's a good chance that Giannis is deserving of like a third straight MVP after this year.
Yeah,
He is still I mean, I don't get like to get too into the in depth in the player rankings thing, but like
yeah,
he's still probably what the second or third best player in the
yeah.
NBA.
He's a
Um,
funny one because, like, at any given point, the numbers are like, yeah, this guy's having the best season in the league. But if you do like the intangible, who do you want in X situation? He always comes up like two or three.
yeah,
Like, it's still going to be LeBron. It still might be Kevin Durant by the end of this year, depending on how much he gives you. Probably still Kawhi too. Like,
yeah.
even though he looked bad closing out playoff games last year.
And even though he's maybe not as much of a shot creator, it's still you probably could still put Davis over him too. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, some of those playoff games with Davis were just
If you get
his
Anthony Davis a shot, he can make it.
yeah, he's looking. There were some games again in the finals. I mean, it was granted it was when the Heat didn't have any big men out there, but it was looking like Wilt Chamberlain
Yeah.
with all these like
Oh, his face-up game looked incredible in those
yeah.
finals.
But yeah, I think yeah, that's the ceiling just because they have one of the best players and they have an amazing starting lineup and they have a good system in place. What do you think their floor is?
I think the floor is very similar to what we saw last year, where it's you get into an Eastern Conference semis and just something's not working. And I mean, whether that's Nick Nurse cooking up something funky defensively that just kind of shuts this team down a bit, whether that's Philly going in there and just manhandling them on the boards, whether that's Brooklyn just turning into exactly what we think Brooklyn
Hmm.
can be at the right time. Like, I think that's an interesting possibility that like Milwaukee loses to a team like Brooklyn, and it's not even because they started to trail off. It's just because Brooklyn started to hit their stride.
Yeah,
Um, but yeah, I think it's similar to last year where they lose in the second round, and we're kind of wondering what happened.
yeah. I think that matchup's very likely too. A like second round 1 seed Bucks versus like 4 seed Brooklyn matchup.
Yeah,
Because Brooklyn, took a while to find their stride and everything, but now they're hitting it really well, and they swept whoever the
yeah,
5 seed was, and now they're going to take care of the Bucks.
and also like I talk about this a lot, but I do think there's going to be an aspect of like Toronto and Miami have their foot on the gas 73 games a year this year.
Mhm.
And Brooklyn kind of doesn't. Like, it's, well, Kevin Durant's coming back from a torn Achilles. As long as he's there when we need him in the playoffs, he'll be good. So
Yeah,
like, I could just see it being Toronto or Miami trying harder to win more regular season games than Brooklyn does. As we move into that conversation about who finishes where, who's winning more regular season games, we actually went ahead and made some tiers for the Eastern Conference, just sort of looking at what teams are in similar spots and what teams kind of have similar aspirations. The four tiers we came up with were finals possibilities, definite playoff teams, play-in teams, which are like that 7 to 10 range, and then the teams that are out in the cold, where we don't know exactly how they got here, but they are going to be on the outside looking in. They might start playing for draft position at some point,
Hmm.
and it's just not going to happen for them this year, is the short way of saying it. Dave, you can kick us off, and I'm equally open to starting out in the cold or with our finals contenders.
I'd like to start at the bottom.
Yeah, I think that's a
Um,
good idea.
so I have three teams in this section for out in the cold. I have and I'm not going to go too into depth because we kind of did throughout this episode.
Yeah,
Got the Knicks, the Cavaliers, and the Bulls. What do you
that's
got?
interesting. See, I have Knicks, Cavs, Bulls. I also have Detroit down there because I think
Okay,
for all the money that we spent this offseason, it's not going to happen.
that's
Like,
that's very possible.
there's just enough, like, I don't know. There's just way too easy a world to see where it's not clicking for Detroit. Then I'll move us up to the play-in teams, starting from the bottom of the play-in teams. I have Charlotte, Atlanta, Orlando, Indiana, and Washington.
Okay,
Russell Westbrook coming in for the Wizards definitely throws a wrench in this because they probably would have been low play-in team to out in the cold. But yeah, those are my 5 play-in teams.
okay. So I don't have these ranked. I also have five, but slightly different five. I have Wizards, Hawks, Charlotte, Magic, and Pistons. Um,
Hmm.
so I'm trying to remember what our differences is. I have the Pistons a little bit higher. You have the Pacers a little bit lower.
I have the Pacers a little bit lower. Just I don't know. There's something about this team that feels like they're gonna take a step back this year, and the Russell Westbrook factor is real for
Mhm.
me, just in terms of like he elevates a team's floor. Um,
No, that makes sense. I
I
think.
do think
No, you go.
there's some wiggle room with how low Orlando finishes, but I at a certain point just kind of wanted to bet on like consistency versus a team taking a leap.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, I
Orlando
think
kind
those
of
were our
has a
big.
team culture.
Who does?
Orlando, they kind of have a
Yeah,
culture.
like even if it's consistently making the 8 seed, they have a thing that they do, and that's
Yeah,
it.
that's why I had them there too.
So
I had Pistons here just because of I know the fit is weird and it doesn't make a lot of sense, but just from pure talent
yeah,
perspective, Blake Griffin is a lot better than anyone on the Knicks, Cavs, or Bulls. Um, so
it's true. I won't fight
that's
you on that. So
that's
so if
ultimately.
you're picking,
Hmm?
if you are picking your playing teams right now, who do you think is 7, 8, 9, 10?
Okay. Quick ranking. I'm gonna put the Wizards at 7,
Mm-hmm.
um, the Hawks at 8, the Magic at 9, and I'm gonna put the Pistons at 10. I'm gonna leave Charlotte out.
I like that. I think it's easy to see where that could happen. I also have the Wizards 7. I think I have Indiana 8, Orlando 9, Atlanta 10.
Okay.
So I think we're both leaving Charlotte out just for different reasons.
Hmm. And we're both kind of
Uh,
high on the Wizards.
yeah. I think we're gonna remember how good Russell Westbrook is when he's not playing weird Morey ball.
Yeah.
Um, so moving on up, our definite playoff teams. So these are teams that are going to be safe, teams that are not going to have to worry about crashing out of the playoffs because they lost one game at the end of the season. Who have you got there?
My definites are I just have three here. I got Raptors, Pacers, Celtics.
Hmm. So you're higher on the Pacers than I am. We'll talk about that. But first, my definite playoff teams are Raptors, Sixers, Celtics.
Okay. Yeah, so my Pacers thought I get the argument that they didn't get much better while a lot of teams around them got better, but I still think um, that starting lineup is one of the better starting lineups in the NBA, and even like among these East teams, I think it's one of the better starting lineups, even of teams in their similar tier. Um,
Yeah,
and I think that can take you take you far enough.
that's a good point. I think there's also an element of just like the house always wins with
Mhm.
Pacers basketball, where it's like they've had a lot of off seasons where they haven't really gotten better, and they're still here.
Yeah,
Like they don't really bottom out a lot. So it's not necessarily illogical to just be like, no, I think they'll be there at the end of this season.
yeah. And when I say
Um,
there, I think like sixth is a
Yeah.
solid spot
Okay.
for them.
I didn't feel like I felt bad putting them eighth, but at the same time, I don't know. I'm higher on some of these other teams. I'm also lower on the Sixers than you are. Not to transition into our finals teams, our finals contender tier. What? Actually, we'll save them. Am I higher on this? I think I have Boston at 6. Do you have Boston 5, 6?
Yeah, I guess in this sense, I'd have the Pacers at 6, and then the Celtics at 4 or 5.
Mm.
Just
And then
and then the Raptors. It's kind of hard to rank those three, just because I could see them going in any order
yeah,
really. Um, the
yeah, like it's
Celtics.
weird because there's definitely a world where one of like Philly, Toronto, or Miami could finish in the 2 seed this year,
Yeah,
but they're probably not the second best team in the conference.
yeah. Um, and I think not the Pacers, the Celtics have the, I mean, the Stevens and the Tatum factor. And I hate to be so simplistic here, but like Tatum is, you know, one of the
I
best
think,
players in the Eastern Conference.
yeah, and I mean, right before the league shut down last year, he was starting to look like one of the best players in the league. Period. And I mean, we've seen what Brad Stevens can do to teams in the playoffs. I don't think it's wrong to just again kind of bet on that being consistent. Um, but if we want to move up, and I think it's important to remember that these aren't necessarily concrete conference standings predictions, even though we have been throwing out numbers. But we both, I think, are on the same page that like as you get to the top, it gets a little bit harder to predict. But who are your finals possibility teams?
So I have four, which feels like maybe a couple too many. Um, I think maybe it should be three, but I can't really decide which team to kick out. But I got the Bucks,
Yeah,
the Nets, the Heat, and the Sixers. Um, I, as far as the Heat go, I mean, it sounds like you have them on your list too. I
I do.
don't think people should just count them out as a bubble fluke situation. I think they're a team that does what they do super, super well and have a great system where every player knows their role and they're just kind of running it back again. And I think there's some good value in that. There's no big shakeup. And I think they'll, yeah. And then as far as the Sixers go, because it sounds like you had the Sixers in the tier below. Um,
I do.
I don't know. I just think this year might be. I just feel like it's time for them to have a really good playoff run, and I think they've put the pieces
Yeah.
around them to make it happen.
I don't necessarily disagree with that argument of they've put the pieces there. And this might be like the take that I have in this video that ages the most poorly.
Mm,
I just I don't know. I think the top of the East is going to be very loaded, and down the stretch, I don't know. I'm just trying to run through like what the matchups are going to be. Theoretically, they could wind up being very much in an Eastern Conference Final series, depending on who the matchup is. Because like if it's Brooklyn, you probably have Ben Simmons guarding Durant, and then my question is who guards Kyrie. But you have I don't know, you have Embiid at the rim to protect that, and you can roll those dice.
yeah,
Um, if it's Milwaukee, I think you get a little bit creative. If it's Miami, you probably throw Simmons on Jimmy and Embiid on Bam. You would know better than I. Does Embiid give Bam trouble?
um, the thing is that Bam is way more moves around way more than a normal
Yeah.
big. Um, so I think they sometimes throw Bam Embiid on Bam, but a lot of the times they like Simmons on Bam too, just because
Okay.
Bam's not that much taller than Ben, and Ben can kind of move around a little bit more. Especially when I mean we saw in the finals, I mean the whole playoff run. There's a lot of times where they trust Bam to just bring up the ball,
Yeah. Yeah.
um, and you can't have Embiid out on the 3-point line guarding Bam. He's gonna get
No.
blown
He will
by,
get.
and you got your rim protection's gone.
Yeah. But I think Philly definitely has like the pieces to be there. I think Miami was an interesting one for me to tier because I think a lot of my Miami hype is just that they kind of hold the keys to stopping Giannis.
Mhm.
Like they've shown that they can do it consistently in a way that nobody really has before, and that makes it a lot easier to get to the finals if you can stop the best player you're going to have to go through. And again, there's a chance that that player winds up being Kevin Durant, but there's also a chance that Kevin Durant's out by the time you get to the Eastern Conference Finals. So I think Miami is going to be there. I think I said this about them last playoffs. They just seem to have like a move for every other team's best player.
Yeah,
I don't know if anyone has a move for Kevin Durant,
yeah,
and we keep on coming back to that because there's he might be the best player in the world if he's healthy.
hmm
Like we're a year plus removed from him being an all defense caliber player while also being the same scorer that he was at his peak.
and
Um,
completely outplaying LeBron in a final series.
exactly. So like it's not necessarily a sure thing, but there's a chance he just returns to that form, and that's horrifying.
Yeah,
So obviously that's going to be a thing on a lot of teams' minds.
I think to close this, I think that's the biggest X factor in all of this. If he
Yeah,
returns as 100% Kevin Durant, I have a hard time picking anyone else to come out of the East.
yeah. No, I think that's a good way to close it.
Um, so yeah, um,
Thanks for watching, everybody.
yep. We'll be doing Western Conference predictions um, to come out sometime next week. And yeah, stay tuned. We'll have some fun series we're going to announce as the season gets going. Be sure to follow us on Twitter, um, where we'll be announcing those. Just came up with that, but
I like it. Yeah, doing some social promo.
yeah. You got anything else?
Nah, that's it. Peace.